Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today for this webinar on therapeutic gardens. I'm joined by two people that I know very well, both in the garden design industry, who I've worked with or worked on similar projects with. So I'm going to introduce them first. Firstly, Humaira Ikram. Humaira runs her own design studio, Studio Ikram, which has been operating for over 10 years now. It's very much her gardens are client-focused, pollinator-friendly and sustainability-driven. Humaira also runs the KLC Diploma, Garden Design Diploma, and she's now a regular contributor with Channel 4 Gardeners Question Time on Radio 4, isn't it? Sorry, Radio 4.
Radio 4, definitely.
Yeah, and also a number of other broadcasting projects in the pipeline, having won the Alan Titchmarsh Garden Media Guild Award for New Talent of the Year. So actually, Humaira, where you have the time, I don't know, because you're also advising the RHS with a number of roles you've got with them. So very, very well equipped. Very well equipped. I've also got Dan Lobb with us today. Dan is another one of my peers who I get lots of inspiration from Dan's work. Very much, I think it's true to say, a very innovative designer. And I think, you know, his sculpting kind of background and interests really come through in his work as well. Daniel runs his own studio, Daniel Lobb Gardens, and he's also worked with other design practices, Bestique and Bolston Aegis, where he's been a crucial member of their design teams. And then finally, myself, I'm Matt Childs. I run my own garden design studio, which I've been doing now for 11 years, Matthew Childs Design. My gardens are very much people focused, and our guiding principle is very much gardens are for people, to quote the famous Thomas Church. We've got a number of gold and best in show medals under our belt because we love doing show gardens and public installation work, both in the UK and around the world. So that's the team today, and we're here to talk to you about our experience of therapeutic gardens. So I think we've got a first little slide up with some questions on it to kind of prompt us as to where we're going to want to go today. So my team of fellow garden designers, I think we're just going to start off by just, from our own experience as professionals and through our own work, rather than kind of giving Google definitions of what is a therapeutic garden, it'd be great to hear from you both as to what therapeutic gardens mean for you. So start off with you, Humaira.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. Maybe we can come back to our heads while we're discussing this. But for me, I think that every garden is therapeutic. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but especially over the last year, I have found solace by stepping outside and just literally being outside, looking at something green, touching the soil. And I think that a lot of people have found that as well over the last year. I mean, we think about therapeutic gardens and people use this term, and we're going to get to that. And those are usually more focused on certain audiences. But for me, I think all gardens are therapeutic, and I definitely have found that. And, you know, there's so many people who are taking up gardening, growing seeds this year, and who have never done that before. And it's that nurturing, that's something that you're looking after. I think that really makes a difference.
Yeah, how about you, Dan?
Yeah, I think I'd agree with everything Humaira said there, but it's just a space to connect with broader nature, to connect with the seasons changing and to see that renewal and that growth and celebrate each season and be part of that and sort of be reminded of that bigger picture that's going on around us and our place within that. So yeah, I think all gardens have that therapeutic quality. I think if it's specifically a therapeutic garden or a sensory garden, then there's that thing about accessibility and making sure that there are places where people can get in amongst the plants and experience that space and be comfortable in that environment.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think I think one thing that we're all aware of is that humans have forgotten that we're actually animals. And we are part of this natural world. You know, we very much think we should be protecting the natural world for natural world's sake. No, actually, we're part of it. And I think we're all very much aware that we need to get back in touch with the soil, how we grow things, back in touch with nature. Yeah, and for me, therapeutic gardens, they came from a very good place in terms of, we think of them very much as being gardens that are in hospitals, or maybe they're part of care centres or schools, those whole kind of settings. And I think we can fall into, for me, a little bit of an area of trends or trying to categorize things. So I totally agree with you guys that rather than seeing therapeutic gardens as like sustainable gardens or wildlife gardens or, you know, play gardens or this or that, actually all gardens, as far as I'm concerned, have the ability to be therapeutic and to really help people's mental and physical well-being. So yes, I think we're all aligned there, which is a good starting point. So if we just return to our slide of questions again. So we're each just going to go through now and kind of give some examples of some of the things we've either worked on or some of the things that we're inspired by, some projects. And we're going to touch on things like why we feel therapeutic gardens are important in a bit more detail, who the audience and the clients have been for some of these gardens, and you know what the impact has been on them. Who else will we be using the space and why? So who else could be using those spaces? How do we make the space accessible for all? And how do we create beautiful, multifunctional and rewarding places that work? So if we start off with Humera, I think Humera is going to take us through some projects.
Yeah, so I mean, I was going to talk about the fact that I run a course, and it's a garden design course, and we have many projects over the year, and one of the projects we have is a therapeutic garden, which is either in a school or a hospital or wherever. And over the last few years, we found that most of our projects are picked because we want to give the students a really good grounding so that when they start working, they'll be able to deal with anything and know how to research things and know where to go. So the therapeutic garden has been an interesting one because I think all of us have worked on therapy gardens in some way or other. And I mean, one of my very first gardens was, you know, for a school. So it's a thing that you come across quite a lot. So if I maybe have a look at the slide, which is about the school. So one of the projects that we took the students to see was a project in the school, which was in sort of inner city, suburban inner city kind of London. And this particular school, which you can see down the bottom, has it's a house of 1,000 students. It's a really big, comprehensive, and it had this small unit of 25 children who were in this autism unit. So brilliant that they were trying to integrate people into the school, but they had to have their own, they wanted to give them their own space as well. And in this space, you can see at the moment, it doesn't look that inspiring. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but like, you know, a bit of tarmac, some white walls and a football goal does not make a inspiring garden for children to hang out in and play. So for us, we then spoke to the students, we spoke to the teachers. If we go to the next slide, you can see that we had a whole host of, you know, all the students all of my students produced designs. And what do we have to think about? We have to think, who was the audience? So we have these children who were between 11 and 16 to 18. So that, you know, it's quite a big range. They wanted a quiet area for them to be able to go to when they were feeling overwhelmed, or, you know, when they had to have some quiet time. They had to have places where they could go and do group work. They also had to have a place where they could play. So they had that football goal, I don't know if you saw. So, you know, somewhere that they could run off some energy, and maybe a space to sit and nurture something. So there was quite a few different things that the teachers and the students needed. But then when we asked the students what they wanted, it was a different kettle of fish. I mean, Dan was also on the project when we were there, and we talked to them. And I think that some of the things that the students said were that one of them said he wanted some rockets. Another one said an ice cream van, which I thought was pretty cool. I mean, I'd like an ice cream van pretty much all the time, all year. But yeah, one of the most basic thing I think was that they played football out there, and they had a wall which went into a next door neighbour's garden. And they said, can we just get a really big net? It seemed like a very sensible thing to do. But Dan, what else did you pick up from them that we?
Yeah, there was a lot of thought about how they were using the space, the sort of play aspect of the space, things to climb on, things to swing on, so as you said about using energy and being active in the space. So it was a multifunctional space in that there were areas for pause and quiet and reflection, but also lots of running around and that sort of enjoyment of being outside. and a bit less constrained. So yeah, it was, I think, really valuable, you know, speaking to the students there, the people who were going to be using the garden, and to get their ideas on that. And interesting with that project that as it was a school, there was the year group coming through, and then there'd be the next year group and the next year group. So the garden would be there for the long term, but the users of that garden are ever changing and evolving. So I think that was a big part of the brief as well, making sure it was adaptable to different uses at different times.
Yeah, so interestingly, that's kind of, you know, very much our first point, isn't it? Is about really getting a very good, thorough understanding of the audience here and who's going to be using the space. And I think what I'm interested in, I mean, what a tough audience, you know, kids, because let's be honest, kids are probably the one audience that have really, you know, lost touch with the outside world and the, you know, the benefit of playing outside. You know, probably our generation, we spend a lot of our time kind of making dens and being out in the natural world. Whereas with the, you know, the digital revolution and how kids now like to play, it must have been very hard trying to engage them in, you know, an outdoor space as being a fun space.
What was really interesting that you're saying there, because the kids who were in the unit were quite interested in maths and computers, and, you know, that's kind of what one of their special interests. A lot of them had that kind of special interest. And one of the students went down that line and she was like, right, I'm going to do computer, like neural networks, but computer networks, and I'm going to use that as my idea, my concept, my larger concept for this garden. But it was really interesting because as a tutor, it seemed like a great idea. It seemed like, wow, that's like, you know, she's really thought this through. But the students really didn't get it. So, you know, and sometimes you really need to simplify and just think about what is the most important thing. Do we want them to go outside and enjoy the space? And, you know, and it for it to be different from inside. I mean, that's the thing, it's just a different space. And so the school actually picked one of the projects, and the one that we showed just up there was the one that won the project, and hopefully they're going to get it built. But then obviously COVID happened, and that's been, you know, stopped at the moment. But hopefully that gives them all the areas that they needed and all of the perspectives, you know, all the spaces that they could all use.
Yeah, and were the kids, I mean, you talked about ice cream vans and that kind of thing. Were they, when we think about therapeutic gardens, we're probably thinking a lot more about kind of the benefit of plants and potentially wildlife. Were those, did plants and wildlife motivate them, or was it more about physical play things within the garden?
Well, I think it was both, actually. So they had to have the physical play for this particular audience, but changing of the seasons really helps and makes people understand nature. And because a lot of the kids that you're saying were really detached from that, we wanted to have that within the garden. So we had trees that were deciduous, and the student who got picked had deciduous trees. They had a little kind of growing area at the back where you could maybe grow tomatoes or something. So, you know, all of those things were kind of built in to the garden as well.
Great.
We could maybe move on to the next slide, because the next slide was another project that we did, which was for in the Hospital of Neuro-disability. So again, slightly different audience, and here you go. This is another very inspiring little space. So this was part of a bigger complex of a hospital, but this area was being redeveloped for people who are going to be in longer term. So people who had so they might have been in wheelchairs or in beds and they couldn't go back home. So we wanted to try and make this feel like a home from home, really. So if we have a look at the next slide.
You know, isn't it bizarre just looking at those pictures there, those first sight pictures, that you have people there that are probably bedbound and only have a view through their window, and yet all that was there was a dark fence to look at.
Yeah.
It really does show you that so many of our spaces are underutilized and can do so much more to help people.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Sorry, Dan, were you going to say something?
No, just to echo what Matt said, really. You know, it's sort of, it was a really hot, sunny space, and just with all the hard surfaces there, it was quite reflective, and there wasn't tree canopy or any shade there. So even in the warmer months, it was still quite inhospitable to go out there. So yeah, to create something there that was welcoming and comfortable in all the different seasons. So thinking about shelter from the rain and the sun and the wind, and yeah, and that view from different viewpoints, from sitting and lying down on a bed and looking up into the canopy or other features. So yeah. Yeah,
and you can see this is one of the students that the work that came through, and she had put these pergolas throughout it, so that when you were maybe in a bed, you'd still have a view of something. And they also had lots of scented plants, lots of things that changed throughout the season, things that you could roll over almost as well. So that was another thing that was discussed by, wheelchairs. So you could have a different perspective on the space, because all of those things were possibly things that you haven't experienced for a while if you've been in hospital. And, this was like a transitional space between a hospital and a home.
And that's very important, actually, isn't it? Thinking about your audience and what height they're actually interacting with the space. So if it's a child or if it's somebody in a wheelchair, obviously their view is very different to somebody standing up at a different height, and also what they're able to access and reach. So I guess providing planters which are raised so that people can actually plant with them and have some horticultural therapy is also really important. And thinking about that accessibility and how the garden's going to be used and interacted with.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, as we go through, I think we're going to be talking more about horticultural therapy as well. I mean, the ones that we've looked at were more about making spaces that felt comfortable for the audiences that were going to be using them. And as we go through, talking through other projects, we'll probably be talking a lot more about how to use horticulture in specific ways to make people feel better. But I then myself designed a small garden, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it because it was on the edge of a school, and there's an image of it, and it's about children. It was a wilderness. It was a bombed out area in between two schools.
Let's have a look at that image.
It was about the children mostly, but what I wanted to kind of bring up was, you can see that we had, there was a little pond. There was nothing there beforehand, so we put in a pond, and the kids could go in and do some pond dipping and look at the plants in the woodland areas. And they had little mirrors that they would look up into the canopy, so you would have a canopy walk by looking into a mirror. I mean, the school had an amazing set of kind of situations that they wanted them to experience. But the biggest thing about this was that we had lots of volunteers who were parents, and also we had this big corporate responsibility drive for this as well. So we had banks and other people coming in, and those people, even though they were coming in to help the school, when they left, they all felt really a lot better. They had a day out, and and I think that was something that kind of made this feel real. It's not just about what the people that we're building these places for. It's actually a load of other people that could be affected by it, and actually, in a positive way. So people who were coming to help were like leaving and being, really feeling that benefit of that biophilia.
Yeah, I think we kind of forget, don't we, that when you think about therapeutic gardens, say potentially in the context of a hospital, we think, oh, it's for the patients. But in reality, you've got relatives there who are in a very stressful situation, obviously. You've got the carers themselves, nurses, doctors, who are also, have very, very, responsible, stressful jobs. And actually gardens like that can be of huge benefit to all of those other groups of people involved, within that arena.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I had just a final image, which is of a Horatios garden that I used to work with Steve West, and he produced one of the first Horatios gardens, which was for a spinal unit in Salisbury Hospital. And beforehand, this was I think it was a tarmac area with a basketball hoop in. If you go back one. Sorry, Scott. Is it one? Or maybe it's forward one. But forward then. There we go. So this, in a different life, was a piece of tarmac. I mean, look at that space. And the way Cleve has produced this, he was thinking about spines, and it's kind of literal. He's got these spines of stone going through, but it's all about planting and spaces. And he used one of the beds that the spinal unit patients would be in, and he wrote, like literally was lying in it. So he made sure that there was views above and around. But this is so much more, because as you said, doctors, nurses, other people were using these spaces and really enjoying them. And before, there was nothing like this, at the hospital.
Yeah, I mean, I can just see from those pictures then, the planting, there's so much texture, isn't there, and so much interest and colour. It's a real sensory experience. You've got the movement of the grasses, you've got the lovely touchy feely landseers there at the bottom, and just all of the colour, and it's you can just kind of see, and the movement of the walls as well. You can see how just going out in that space would kind of put you into a different frame of mind. I think creates a different mood and atmosphere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think also just on a commercial point, because I always like to think commercially. I know you had a slide there, Humera, about charities, but I think what's great from our industry point of view is that therapy and therapeutic gardens are kind of like another string to our bow in a way. You know, money gets raised by charities for doing different things and different activities. And what a wonderful use of money to be able to create a garden, you know, a tangible space that is living and growing and continues to be of benefit.
But the flip side of that is it has to be usable and accessible for the people who are going to be using it. So, and that's why we're discussing this today. Who is your audience? You know, because they're all therapeutic gardens are slightly different. And actually the charities that Thrive is a really good charity. I think Dan's going to be talking about them in a minute, but they have courses on how to build these gardens, you know, what you have to think about, if there's wheelchairs, how wide you have to have paths and all those kinds of things. So you can actually go and do a course, just because what you don't want to do is waste that money. You want to make sure you're using it and being as efficient as possible and creating something really beautiful.
Yeah, and the raising of those funds, as we know, often with a lot of these charities or hospitals or organisations, that's actually a very difficult part of it, isn't it? Is being able to, you know, engage and get stakeholders involved in order to sponsor. So often funding for these projects, that's kind of a big part of the challenge at the very beginning, really. So as much as we can do to promote the benefits of them, the better. I worked on one of my early projects, was a dementia care centre in Ham. And, you know, the more research I did and the more I realised, you know, people that are losing their memories, gardens can be a wonderful opportunity to put cues throughout the space that can help them to kind of remember things from their past life. We put a piece of sculpture in that kind of reflected a bit of a washing line. So kind of just memories of everyday activities that would help jog people's memory, you know, and things. So I think there's a real lovely story around these gardens, I think.
You touched on as well the sort of multi-sensory aspects of a garden, and particularly with dementia, the powerful aspect of scent. You know, smelling a particular flower, it'll take you straight back to that place where you smelt it before, and that reminder, like geraniums in the greenhouse and tomatoes growing, and yeah, we've all got sort of memories of particular smells of particular seasons. That takes us to a different place. So it's that power of different senses. You know, it's visual, but it's also about all the other senses as well, connecting to that memory and the place.
Yeah. Brilliant. Dan, let's hear a bit more from you now and some of your projects. Was there anything else, Mary, that you wanted to touch on? Or?
Oh, I think that's me. And
let's move on.
I'm going to learn more as we go, forward.
We won't be able to keep you quiet, will we? So Dan, tell us about some of your thoughts and work.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of projects to talk to you about today. One of them is Maggie's Centre, the cancer care charity for Leeds Hospital. And another one is National Trust Garden. It's a memorial garden. I think the slides, so we've got the Maggie's project here. I'll talk to you about this one first. So I was working with Bolton Aegis at the time, landscape architects, and they led on the design concept principle of this one. Maggie's as a charity have a very detailed landscape architect's brief for the gardens that go alongside their centres, and the garden is very much an integral part of the whole therapeutic or sort of care that they provide. And this project, the architect for the building was Thomas Heatherwick, and the building had these fins as part of the structure, and it was sort of, the concept was that it pushed through the ground almost like a mushroom coming up, and this sort of gilled underside. Lots of glazing, that direct connection to the site. The site was right in the middle of the Leeds in the hospital grounds. So you can see next door is a multi-storey car park, and there were other hospital buildings around. The site was surrounded by a road. So very busy, very urban, on quite a steep hill as well. So the concept for the garden here was to take the native British woodland and bring that into the heart of the city here and celebrate that seasonality, the sort of spring growth and that renewal that we're in at the moment, that sort of joy of the new growth coming through, but then also go through the sort of summer and enjoy the shade and some of the screening that the trees and other shrubs would provide, and then into the autumn with the colour, and then the bare stems into the bulbs, sort of late winter, early spring again, and have that seasonality and all aspects of life, from life renewal, and also then the sort of death and decay, and sort of not shy away from that as part of the natural process. So there were lots of thoughts about how that environment, that type of planting, could be used, I suppose, to create a sense of enclosure and comfort for users and the building itself on the site.
Do you know, can I just say that it's such a wonderful example of landscape and architecture being integrated and working well together.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of our urban spaces now, we really know that we need to bring plants and trees into them in order to cool the environment and to make them, you know, more pleasing places to live. And actually, I think that project there, Dan, just totally sums up, you know, where
also, it feels like a big hug, doesn't it? Like you're sitting in the middle of it. It's like a big green hug. And when you're talking about that architecture and plants, but then you look at the Leeds Hospital behind, and it's like big grey, you know. So it can be melded, but sometimes it's pretty tricky. Yeah. But yeah, what a brilliant project!
What a wonderful project. Love it.
Yeah. And you know, a lovely charity to work with as well. And you know, that collaboration with the architects there, making sure that the building and the landscape sat coherently together. You know, it was all about the views from inside, as well as the experience of approaching the building through this landscape. So I've got another slide to show you of another project thinking about a sort of therapeutic garden. So this is the National Trust property in Burghclere, Newbury. It's a memorial chapel built in the 1920s after the First World War. The interior has the paintings of Stanley Spencer. It's a incredibly poignant, powerful experience going in the chapel. It's quite a small building. You can see in the image on the top left there, there's almshouses alongside. So there used to be people living there. The chapel is just a tall piece in the middle. The back of the building, there used to be allotments for the people that lived in the almshouses, but it was never really meant for public display. And the National Trust found the site's getting more and more busy and more visitors. And when people come out of the chapel, having such sometimes a really profound experience and connection to the artwork there, to have somewhere just to sit quietly and reflect on that experience, they felt was important. So I developed a design for the back of the chapel, which is the bottom left image, and then on the right there, just after it had been planted. And again, tied in with the architecture of the building, this sort of early modernism, sort of quite austere straight lines taken directly from the building, but also developing the design with Thrive, the horticultural therapy charity. They come in weekly to manage the garden, and they have requirements to make sure that their clients they can feel secure and safe in the garden and not on display. So I introduced several hedges in the scheme here that would provide sort of a graded view through, so that when people are circulating through the garden, there are always corners that can provide shelter for people doing the active gardening. There's also, just on the bottom left there, we've got a polytunnel and a sort of productive area where they can grow the plants to be planted in the garden. So it's very active gardening here, and there were beds, for that. So multi-use space. And that idea we touched on earlier of the therapeutic, or the therapy of people actually being involved in the project. Yeah. We invited Help for Heroes, the military charity for rehabilitating veterans. They came along and did a lot of the clearance and the sort of early work in the garden. So that project was very collaborative and trying to involve as many people as possible. And I think lots of people got a lot from it as a result of that. It was a privilege to help that project become realised, really.
Great. Yeah. Brilliant. So was that the end of the projects you were going to take us through, Dan?
Yeah, that's the two I had to show you at the moment. And I think, both very different projects, but similar in their way of creating that connection to the place and to nature more generally.
And I love the point you made about enclosure as well, that the fact that, by using trees or hedges, we all want to feel safe within an environment, particularly people that are needing some form of psychological or physical therapy. You need to feel secure. And I loved Humera's expression of a great big hug. And, you can see how you can create spaces like that to make people feel comfortable.
Yeah, I love those layers of green that you had as well. But, you know, Matthew, you are the one for colour. I feel that that's...
So if we just move on to my first picture of a project. My whole experience and my approach to gardening all kind of firstly came from a show garden I did. Oh, sorry, I think it's the next slide. Sorry, Scott, the next slide. Is it there? There we go. So my first ever show garden was at Hampton Court Palace. My garden design journey all began from a life-changing experience where I was involved in the London bombings in 2005. Badly injured, but I was very lucky to survive and took it as an opportunity to really do something creative with my life and became a garden designer. So this first show garden was all about that journey from a very scary kind of place of, you know, where I needed to kind of get myself back together and recover, to a space of hope and, you know, a journey that led me to be doing things that I really love. But I thought this garden was all about me. And what I found at the garden was that people that came to visit it actually related it to their own experiences, whether they'd been bereaved, whether they'd been suffering from a long-term illness. One lady had been involved in the tsunami, Boxing Day tsunami. And all of these people kind of had this same experience of recovery. And I was amazed at how a garden could do that. It could tell a story and it could act as a form of therapy where people could almost let it all out. I had people in tears and I was like, wow, that's really, really powerful. So for me, this has been, this garden, which was back in 2012 now, is still a garden that really guides me through all of my work and what I do, because I want to be able to touch people's emotions and for all gardens to be therapeutic in a sense. I really believe that all gardens have the ability to do that. So just moving on to the colourful slide that we just saw, that was a project where I collaborated with Studio Think, very much known for their colour, and I love colour as well, so you can see we went absolutely mad here in Moscow. It was an 850-metre long temporary installation that was there for 2 weeks and was enjoyed by 70,000 people. Now, this boulevard was very much a boulevard with modern people walking down it on their phones, not talking to each other, going from A to B. And we wanted an intervention which stopped people in their tracks, people of all ages, children to adults, and it got them to play and to interact and to stop and to use the space rather than to just walk through it. So you can see we did some wacky things like a magical tunnel there, which was all about colour and shape, and we thought this was going to be for kids. We put some tricycles outside of it so they could kind of meander their way down this pink path. In the end, we had lots of babushkas, lots of grandmothers taking selfies and things in it and just absolutely loving the space. And you can see there we put in lots of kind of playful kind of interventions for children to engage with. And as a result of children playing, parents stop and talk to each other and make friends and all of those kind of things. So just touching what Dan said earlier, I think that sensory things like colour and scent are just so important to use within a therapeutic space. So just move on to my last.
Can I just say one thing there? It's just so joyful. It's just so joyful. And I think sometimes we get like tied up with the whole therapeutic gardens and we become a bit worthy, but you know, we can just be happy and joyful and really enjoy that space and time.
I think we're all about, I think the three of us, I think the thing that kind of runs through all of our work is we're very much all about democratizing gardening and making it accessible to all. And I think sometimes you just have to have some fun. And I think this is what, you know, spaces should be. They should really represent the audience that are going to be using them. So this last slide is just to show you some of my private work. This is a Thomas Church garden here on the left. I talked about gardens being for people and how he's a real guiding principle. And I'm just really believe that if you give people all of the functional spaces and all of the places to use and the things that represent them and their activities, they will use the garden, they will nurture it, they will love it. And as a result, all of the other great things that we need, like biodiversity and wildlife and everything, will all follow as well. So for me, I think therapeutic gardens, therapy should be a part of all of our gardens, whether they're commercial, residential, or, you know, for charities and hospitals. So guys, I think that kind of brings us to the end of our time together. I guess if we just have one like kind of statement about concluding, for me, I think we've shown some traditional strands there of where therapy gardens are so important for big organizations and charities in the work that they do in providing services. But I think all of us have all touched as well upon how therapy, mental and physical well-being is so important, and gardens have a big part to play in that therapy. So for me, that's what's come across. I don't know about you, Humera.
Well, I mean, all gardens are therapeutic, but let's not forget to have some fun. That's basically what I was thinking there when you showed all the colors and the people and, people enjoying their spaces. That's really what we want people to do, go outside and enjoy the outside space. And then, it will be therapeutic.
And final word to you, Dan.
Yeah, I think it's just that connection. It's that connection and that appreciation of the wonder that's around us, in nature, that's happening everywhere. But if we can connect people to that inner space that feels comfortable and is accessible, and there's a celebration and a sort of joyfulness that comes from that, that would be my concluding thoughts. So
great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.